real inclination here. It's not just it's speeding along in space, but that there is intelligent life forms within it. And if in fact this does kind of have a connective tissue to Ezekiel's wheel, and this is often missed by people that discuss this subject matter, is that when Ezekiel's wheel touched down on Earth, there were occupants. And these occupants have confounded scholars for millennia because the Bible says they had the image of the likeness of a man. The image of the likeness of a man. What is that? What is that exactly? And so, if this is in fact artificial, then this would kind of play into the hands and actually confirm some of the testimonies we've heard from whistleblowers who are I'm not talking about just Jason Sands and other people. I'm talking about like Jim Semivan, like Danny Sheehan, who are major players in ufology, and have had conversations with people behind the scenes. And they've told us over and over again that something is on its way, number one. And number two, that we're on borrowed time. And so I do believe at this point in time that it is demonstrating characteristics that are abnormal. Now, if in fact, like I said, if in fact this doesn't turn out to be something, uh, paranormal, I think again that what we would be experiencing now is soft disclosure. Avi Loab, even with a Muamua, right? He would come out and say, listen, that does seem to demonstrate some weird capabilities. Well, that wasn't what he thought it was, and now 3i Atlas. And so my point here is two things can be true at the same time. If in fact this is not what we're being told it is by our government, that doesn't rule out the potential of something else coming behind it, and that all of this is merely soft disclosure in a way to get those in the know prepared for what's coming. But if in fact it is a piloted craft, I'm not, I mean, as much as I am interested in its structure, I'm much more interested in the occupants and why it is that scholars
Yes.
for thousands of years, what can we really say about a species that has the image, not the image of a man, and not even the likeness of a man, but the image of the likeness of a man? What that presents is another species that is either trying to appear as human or it is human. And that opens up a whole nother can of worms, my friend. What
I-
is that?
Indeed, it does. And this is the way I like to uh, breach all this with people is by talking in terms of species,
Yeah.
because I think it's almost easier for people to grasp that than say like non-human.
Well,
And
yeah.
and and all the work we're doing is trying to make this legible for people to get their minds around.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, also, I mean, what we're trying to do is quantify the paranormal, the supernatural, and even the paraphysical. But what we're realizing is language is insufficient in many cases. It's not just that I don't have a way to describe it, it's ineffable. There is no language we can use that could really accurately depict what we're dealing with in terms of the phenomenon. And I think that's kind of where we're at, and that goes into this direction too, because if you look at all of the cultural costumes that the phenomenon has been given throughout history, one thing we know for sure is that they are given to the phenomenon for a reason. And at first blush, researchers believe that it was just some kind of dogma that was, or some worldview that was forced upon these entities to where it's like, yeah, well, you believed it to be your dear Aunt Edna because, it was a part of your worldview. It's like, no, the phenomenon manifested and wanted me to believe it was my dear Aunt Edna. And so there's this kind of co-creation of its manifestation. that takes place. And so these cultural costumes, originally I thought, okay, these are just projections, like it's, the Jungian archetype, as you mentioned early on, where we are co-creating the manifestation. We are in charge of this. It's like, no, we're not. We are only in charge of how it manifests in many cases. We help co-create the interface, but we are not creating the phenomenon. The phenomenon is an independent entity. It does what it wants when it wants to. And then when it interacts with us, and again, it manifests through that cultural costume, which is severely damaging to the phenomenology. Because even then, if we go back to Ezekiel and we look at the phenomenon retroactively and say, well, how do we even know they had the image of the likeness of a man? Or was that the phenomenon playing that role as a mask when it interfaced with our species? And so my point here to kind of summarize it all is we are a species that highly depends on form to determine function.
That
And
is,
now what I'm real you catching it?
yes, it's such a major point. Major.
Huge. I mean, it's uncomfortable. But yes, and not just that, but we determine the good and the bad based upon form, and we ignore function. And so, what the phenomenon realized long, long ago was that if I can manipulate my form, I can hide my function. That's why you have aliens acting like incubi.
Yes.
And yet, these two victims, experiencers, will never, ever speak to each other. Why? Because researchers bought into the form and not into the function. I'll take it a step further, and this is very, very concerning. Is that number one? We may have never. How about that? We may have never truly witnessed the true form of the phenomenon. Case in point, Dr. Gary Nolan. A boy is in France. He's in his car. He looks through the sunroof. He sees a structured craft, massive in scale. His mother then takes a photograph of it, but the photograph she took looked completely different than what her boy witnessed with his eyes. And what that points to is this fact that we can no longer trust what we see with respect to the phenomenon. And that whereas conventional wisdom would tell us that if you look at an object and it's a singular object, it should look like that singular object on camera. Now, what we're realizing is that's not the case either, that there's potentially two objects there. One of them is the source, the other one is a physiological construct created by the source phenomenon. Now, what that means again is retroactively, if we take that data point and we go back in time, and here's the heaviest point of the night, we may have mythologized the mask.
Oh my.
We may have, there's the sleight of hand, right? Where's the
Yes.
real Where's the trick? No, the trick is deception. The source is there. It's just diversified itself in our presence. And so thereupon we have this passage. It has the image of the likeness. Well, why wasn't it just the image of a man? No, 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 no. It's the diversification. It has the image of the likeness of a man. And so what we're dealing with now are the images of the likenesses of ghosts and grays. And not realizing that, yes, the reason it's diversifying itself is because it's evolving. And the reason it's evolving is because it wishes to evade. And sooner or later, researchers like myself, you, and my other colleagues, friends, we actually sit down together and say, if now we finally determined through pattern confirming evidence that we can no longer trust the form, then what else has form that we can no longer trust regarding this thing? Now, that's number two. Number three, it's like, okay, how much of the mask have we mythologized? If we go into hauntings and we say, okay, I've written entire books about this white lady floating around in the house, a castle or something, not realizing that that is a physiological construct produced by the phenomenon. That's not real. How do we know it's not real? That's why in many cases we go back in time and try to, here's the glitch of the matrix, everybody, try to locate the individual. Did she die there? No, she didn't. Did she, is she some poor, newlywed who passed away right after her wedding? Is that why she's always in a wedding dress? No. Why? Because a lot of these are not real. They are a part of what's called the learning matrix. It's a theatrical production designed to diversify its identity in our eyes, hoping, wanting us to create mythology around the fake, to believe that that is some kind of paranormal architecture designed to help us grasp in the darkness. Truthfully, it's not. These are waves in a pool, right? We're looking at phenomenon, not the phenomenon, something that's produced in our presence. So we'll go literally chasing ghosts, not really investigating the true source. Does that make sense?
100%. And makes so much sense that it sends a chill hearing it laid out in word form, because once you see, you see. And that's the whole thing with all this. And that's kind of the work we're doing, is trying to show. With this, I think that there's something here, and I'm not sure if I talked about it with you last time, but it's
Mhm.
certainly been talked about, and I've talked about it. This phenomena that we're talking about, also with what we see, what we don't see, etc., is this whole the
Mhm.
auroras, where you can't see them with your naked eye, but you can record them with your phone camera, with your camera.
Mhm.
I think that this is another hard example of what we're talking about. There is something going on, but the naked eye can't perceive it. But the phone does something. Where
Mhm.
is the truth there? What is the
Right.
real thing there? Because there is something, but the something is not tangible through the naked eye.
Oh, let's go very deep here. Now, with respect to this concept that when we actually make a conscious connection with the phenomenon, we observe something, that what we are witnessing with our own naked eye is sometimes is completely different than what's actually there. What that means is that just because it is the most visible to us does not mean it is the most present with us. But that hit like a thousand anvils. Just because I see it the most doesn't mean it is the most present with me.
Yes.
So something else is actually present there that we are not seeing. Now, with respect to the way that phenomena, even ufology works, is you see an entity, and people will take a photograph of it. In many cases, like I said, something else shows up. But now that we have two and not just one, which of the two is real? And then we kind of unfortunately bleed into the area of topomancy,
Yes.
where it's highly possible, dare I say probable, that a lot of these entities are designed to trigger tulpas, thought forms within our human consciousness. And then you ask ourselves, okay, are some of these entities thought forms? And is that why? And even though we say, okay, it's diversified, but like I said, which one of them is real? Is it possible that some of the entities that we are actively seeing but are not capturing on camera are tulpas? And the whole purpose of this conscious connection is to get us to observe, so that what is a thought form can now form a thought, and now it's existing. So it Two things can be true at the same time. I have no idea. I'm just saying that it's possible that yes, they're both right. Yes, that young boy did see a craft. Why? Because he helped produce it in this dimension as a tulpa, as a thought form. But where is the source? The source is on camera. So in that instance, both of them can be true at the same time. Just like in hauntology, I see a lady in white. Okay. What did you capture on camera? Well, I captured an aura. Okay. What if one is there to produce the other? In that when we are observing this, that thought form that actually formed the thought is now being created. It exists. Then that would go down the rabbit. This is heavy, deep stuff, but let's just go there for a second. That would mean that some of these ghosts aren't being seen because they're real. They're real because they are seen. I'm wondering if some of the phenomenon itself is designed to trigger tulpomancy within the observer, to where whatever thought form that was forming the thought now becomes incarnated or manifests because we are co-creators of it. Yeah, and that's what again, is it really that structured craft? Is it the massive craft? Well, that it was real to the boy. Is that a thought form? Is that a thought form that was triggered by the phenomenon, weaponizing our own consciousness to produce entities that are just dying to become real in our reality? So that could be the case. I don't know. That's something to entertain, but I lean heavily towards the fact that what we are experiencing now is a phenomenon that's diversifying itself. It wants to do the same thing. It's why it's always done the same thing, but it will don the cultural costume until it decides not to. And that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. But, are some of these entities thought forms?
This makes complete sense to me, and it's very logical. I want to
Yeah.
underline that.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons or aspects that we seem to be tied into this as, and I'm just going to air quote here, as humans, because I
Mhm.
really don't know in the end, our vessels are, but I think there's more to be said there. However, this little light of mine, this thing in us that
Mhm.
for those of us that are, again, human, we are creators and we co
Mhm.
create. And this is something that's very special in us. This is, could be a special gene. I don't know, but it's something that it seems to have caught the attention or has always been under the eye as a way to create realities,
Mhm.
worlds, and all that. So when you mention this co-creation of a tulpa, it's
Yep.
using our innate God-given abilities to create. And, the base level of creation is obviously procreation and having children. But
Mhm.
we know, and occultists, especially deep occultists, know that the magical child is something you create that is just as tangible as a child, but it's
Mhm.
not, doesn't have to be in a physical form as a child. So when we're looking at the idea of tulpas or magical realities or reality changing realms, etc.
Mhm.
The mind can go anywhere here. They need us. We are needed to create something that these occultists at the proverbial table are trying to create and steer us towards. And they need all of us to participate in the ritual, in the process.
Right. Absolutely. I completely agree. And in the middle of this co-creation, again, it's almost like there is an intelligence that will tap into that, I guess, potentiality within our species. And I've long studied the idea of topomancy and egregores and that kind of theory. And I've come to the conclusion that the thought form is the same entity that forms the thought.
Bingo.
And it create, yes, it's replicating. And then when you have that thought form that forms the thought, It's like the CE5 movement. Now I just feel led to go out and observe the phenomenon. Why? Because it's forming the thought. And then you go out and all of a sudden the phenomenon manifests, right? That becomes a thought form. And so there, right, it's the entity that forms the thought to go observe the phenomenon, and it's the thought form that manifests. And there is this again, not just the co-creation of the manifestation, but in many cases, it should begin and end with a thought form. It should begin and end with our intentions, right? And we've long heard that theory regarding CE5 and everything that goes along with it. But the idea would then be, well, because I'm co-creating the interface, my intentions with the phenomenon. If they're pure, that means the phenomenon will have pure intentions with me. Okay, so somewhere within that model of, okay, the thought form is forming the thought and I'm co-creating, somewhere in the middle of that model, my interface event, something changes. And next thing you know, the proto-intelligence that's been hiding in the shadows shows up. And there's very rarely do we have anything to stop it. It just does what it wants to do. And it's a problem for our species, again, because we're being fed a lot of fallacies in the field, and I can go into different cases where the phenomenon has hijacked consciousness to where, again, what the experiencer witnesses is not really the phenomenon, it's an extension of it, right? It's an alias of it, but somewhere at the tip of the snake's tail, this is a reference to the Iranian spider-tailed viper, at the tip of the snake's tail, there's a spider. And once you're entertaining the spider, right, you're thinking, okay, this is just a spider, it can't hurt me. Out of nowhere, you realize for utter astonishment that is not a spider. It's a construct that we helped create in observing the phenomenon. And that construct is tied to a snake. And so sooner or later, when the phenomenon wants to, it'll take all the information we fed into the program at the tip of the cell, right? And then from the spider, it'll go all the way up to the head of the snake, and you realize, okay, we're not dealing with separate phenomena. We're dealing with one. And in order to conjure me, it decided to evolve into what I was wanting to conjure. Anyways, I'm rambling, but yeah, it's interesting stuff.
You're not rambling, and it's relevant and extremely important ramblings if it is considered ramblings. And so when we look at this idea of hijack consciousness, and I think personally, we're looking at an absolute epidemic of that, by the way, that's created this what feels like an uncanny valley reality we have by these players that are kind of steering the ship here
Mhm.
and using us as basically consciousness batteries as they
Right.
consume us. They're consuming us basically, but because we're batteries, and our ability to create is part of that battery function. It's not like they're just feeding off of us. It is a fuel. And what is a fuel? A fuel engages something else as a means to an end. And that is where I think a lot of people they drop the ball right there. Or what's a loosh fest? Well, what is the okay, so good. Loosh is fuel. Fuel for what?
Right,
And,
right.
and what's the vehicle here and where's it going?
It, this is a real deep well of research here. You're hitting on here. It's so we do know that beyond all of its mass, the phenomenon itself does seem to be parasitic. We first knew that because of the way it would employ parasitic mimicry when interfacing with experiencers. I'm your dear Aunt Edna, like I said, or I'm a deceased loved one. I'm a lover on the other side. So at first blush, and I've had conversations with an ecologist who did his PhD on parasitic mimicry and parasitism in oceanic life forms. And so he got on a Zoom call and he's telling me exactly the same thing. He's like, yeah, this seems to be parasitic. And we went down that rabbit hole. But at first blush, when we got our hands on the pattern confirming evidence, it was quite obvious that this was demonstrating not just a symbiotic relationship or symbiosis with our species, but at times it turned deeply, deeply parasitic. Let me impregnate you, right? You have an incubus. Let me put my species in your womb. Why? Because you're going to raise it. It's going to gestate within your body. That's a parasite. And when you're done, we're going to take it. That's parasitism.
Yes.
And there are many cases in biology of that taking place. So my point is that at first blush, we had that pattern confirming evidence at our disposal. And so we said, okay, yeah, it does seem to be parasitic. Now, some of the research I've been doing, it's even worse than that because whatever this intelligence is, it's almost like a fungus inhabiting an ant farm, an ant colony, where it's existing within a controlled environment and at its choosing can take over other life forms. And so its presence, being parasitic, it doesn't mean it's not in control or that it's fighting, it's fighting for control, if I could say that. So my point though is we have cases where it's not just in incubi literature where the phenomenon manifests an entity that is, I'm a deceased lover or I'm a living boyfriend. And then something else happens, and then the phenomenon pulls the mask off. It was never who it appeared to be, but because we equate form with function, we believe the intentions of the entity are what construct the image of the entity. If you're my grandfather, you're going to be a good guy. My grandfather was amazing, and so we kind of fall into that trap. My point, though, it was limited at one time to just incubi cases, succubi cases. I I have some even more disturbing data to present. I've been in deep in the book of William J. Barrett. He has a book called Deathbed Visions. And just like the phenomenon would weaponize facial features and characteristics of the deceased in incubi accounts, there's evidence that some of these near-death visions are not of the real people they claim to be. Right? I mean, okay, so let's go down some case studies in Barrett's book, Deathbed Visions. This is weird. Now, many of these were so alarming because at that time, and still today, of the bedside manner in cancer wards and such, you have someone who is, it's pretty, it's getting to the end, and the family, they're suffering, obviously. It's very unfortunate. And people around them, this has happened hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout history, has to have, where a family member will die and they will not want to disclose that to this individual because it could trigger them to just give up on life and further compound their sickness. So what they would do is what William Barrett's research is they would just never tell the patient, never tell the loved one. So he has cases of hundreds of them where one specific case study was a girl who has a deathbed vision. She's visited by a cousin who lives across the world in France. And to her utter astonishment, she is describing her cousin to her mother. And her mother is terrified, worried because, number one, you're having this paranormal experience. But number two, and more importantly, how did you know your cousin has passed away? It's curious. There's another case study, and that's kind of a foundation, a preface to the deeper research here. There's another case study that Barrett presented where a boy that was very, very, very ill is witnessing of his father in the corner of the room. And she's like, mommy, father's here. And it's one of the rare cases where the entity is witnessed by both, like two people, more than one. And the child seeing his father, and the mother looks in the corner of the room, and against the white wall stood a tall shadow figure. And in this fleeting moment, the boy is saying, Father is back.